And I'm saying it because I spoke to somebody very senior within the financial services, and this person didn't want to be named, and wasn't keen on the idea of, and these are my words now, coming out as a black professional, because there's also something about.
Sorry,
yes, and we're having intermittent freezing. Yeah, I spoke to somebody very, very senior. I won't say who he is, but very senior within a particular industry, and he shared with me that he's happy to have a conversation with me, but he wasn't particularly keen to kind of come out as black, so to be part of the conversation, because he found it was more helpful not to be part of the conversation. Does that make sense?
Interesting. And he's from mixed ethnicity?
No, he's black. He's black. He's black, and in a way, I'm sharing this with you because I feel it's. I want to be honest before I ask you to do something, because there is a sense, John, and it's shared with quite a few people, that it's okay to be a black professional, but the moment that you're a black professional talking about being black, that shifts you somewhere else, and that might not be so positive for your career. That's what some people have said to me.
Right. Interesting. I have come across that, and there are individuals, again, I know of, within the industry that I'm in, I can think of one individual in particular who holds that view, who is a black man who has, until very recently, and even now reluctantly, engaged in any conversation around race, because in his view, he is a successful leader who happens to be black, and does not see the advantage of flipping those around and saying, I'm a successful black leader. He is a successful leader who just happens to be black. And that's his perspective, which I have some sympathy for, but is not necessarily how I view the world myself.
Okay. All right. Okay, that's fine. But I wanted to share that with you in case you thought, well, actually, I'm not sure myself. I'm being hyper cautious here. So I've got some questions. Can I run through? I'll make a start and let's see how we get on. So I'm going to just tell me about yourself, Jonathan. John, you called yourself John. You've got Jonathan here. Where did you grow up? Where did you go to school? Just tell me briefly about yourself and your career.
Okay, so I guess I should start with my ethnicity, because it's not obvious, and I get, particularly in Asia, they're never sure where I'm from. So my father is Nigerian, hence the name, and my mother is from Switzerland, Swiss French, and they met in the early 60s in London. So my father came to study, as many Nigerians did. And my mother came actually originally as an au pair from Switzerland to learn English, and they met. And long story short, 4 kids later, I'm the fourth of 4. Then I emerged into the world. So born in Brixton, grew up in South London. So Brixton, Kennington, Streatham, Tooting, Thornton Heath, Crystal Palace. So South London through and through, throughout my life actually, always been South London before I moved to Singapore. Went to a pretty tough comprehensive school, Archbishop Tennyson's, which was just opposite the Oval Cricket Ground. So, and was formerly a grammar school, but had just changed to becoming a comprehensive school, and in a pretty tough period in the early 80s. So lived through the sort of both Brixton riots and all of that sort of civil unrest around the time 1981, the first Brixton riots, or uprising, depending on your political persuasion. And so lived through a time of pretty tough social unrest, and grew up in a pretty, in a very much a kind of, I guess, a working class black community. in terms of the school and my friends and the environment that I was growing up in. And then obviously having mixed heritage, having to work through self-identification and, when I was growing up, it was okay to be called a half caste, it was like, people would say, well, I would identify myself as half caste, and then you kind of have to go through your process. And then I guess becoming a teenager in the sort of 90s, and going through the whole experience of, Afrocentrism and Public Enemy and Malcolm X and discovering an African identity was a process that I went through as a sort of a young man. So I guess through my teens into my early 20s, that process of understanding that blackness is also, there's a political dimension to blackness, as well as a kind of a biological or the biological is like that's a construct, right? So I'm more comfortable with this idea of ethnicity than I am with race, because as we all know, race is a construct that was used against us for particular reasons. But I also recognize that there is a political construct that sits in this idea of blackness as well. So that's something that, I guess, in my radical youth was something that I very much identified with, and was very much a part of that kind of Afrocentric movement that was around in the sort of late 80s to early 90s.
Okay. So tell me then about your career as a black man.
So I guess my career has been, it's been a long one. And I realized this literally just yesterday when I was sitting down with members of my team asking where they were during 9/11. And for some members of my team, they were at school. In fact, many members of my team were at school. And then it occurred to me that when we went around the table and everyone was talking about their experiences, and obviously some were in the Philippines and some were in Singapore and some were, because it's quite a diverse team, some were in Europe. And then they said, "Where were you, John?" And I was like, I was in a management away day. And when 9/11 happened, and it struck me, my God, that's almost 20 years ago. And I was in a management away day 20 years ago. I've been in management for that long, which is just quite terrifying on some levels. So I guess I've always been very entrepreneurial. I left art college and set up my own design practice straight from art college. Had some support, so got some support from the government and got some support from a youth kind of empowerment organization who gave me, free office space and helped me to set up and bought my first computers. And, I wouldn't have been able to really get into graphic design without that support. So I then ran a design studio, again in South London, for a number of years, for about 9 years, which I then went on to sell. And then was working in the kind of, I guess, I should say, that supported me.
So that you're working in, I lost you temporarily, you're working in a...
Yeah, so the organisation that had provided me with a kind of an incubator support was a not-for-profit kind of social enterprise, which was called Involve. And so I would have my design company, and then I would also initially volunteer, and then essentially they started asking me to work. So I split my time between having my own company and then working in this not-for-profit. And because I'm very business-minded and very commercially minded, I ended up becoming the business director of this not-for-profit called Involve. And I would be the person who was, and we were, it was an organization that was involved in trying to work with the hardest to reach young people, so some very disadvantaged young people, and encouraging them into more pro-social behaviors. So if they're involved in drugs or crime or gangs, we would try and pull them out from those environments by giving them, by training them, by getting them jobs, by kind of supporting them to turn their life around. So I became the business director there. as well as running my own company. And I ended up